I have watched for longer than most stars can remember, while others flared and faded, lived brilliant short lives across the skies. I remained a silent ember against the endless black, circling my appointed path, unnoticed, unseen, yet never unassigned. I was not born to dazzle, not sculpted for spectacle. My light was modest, a flicker by cosmic standards, yet I sensed from the beginning that my silence held a purpose. I kept my distance, observing the blue orb from the edges of creation, drifting through vast corridors of dust and time, untouched by war or worship, faithful to a rhythm only heaven could compose. For eons, nothing changed. Empires rose and collapsed. Prophets spoke and fell silent. The heavens swirled above civilizations that barely lifted their eyes. But I remained steady, not by strength, but by calling. I was waiting. Though I didn't know what for, I felt it in the marrow of my light. A tension, quiet but undeniable. Like an inhale that never exhaled. A story paused mid-sentence. Then one night a night that looked like any other, I sensed it. A tremor beyond time. Not violent, not loud, but like a heart beginning to beat. Something shifted in the breath between stars. I turned toward it, not with movement but with meaning. Somewhere, far below, history bent. Not cracked, not snapped bent, as if a whisper had passed through the lungs of God and stirred the waters of destiny. I listened. The cosmos listened. We all did. But nothing came. No trumpet, no thunder, just more silence. Yet the silence was different. Not empty, but full. It was not absence, it was presence unspoken. And in that presence, I recognized a voice I had never heard but always known. You will go. The voice seemed to say not in words, but in knowing. Not now, but soon. When the time ripens, I did not burn brighter. I did not rush forward. I only waited. Still, faithful, expectant. For stars do not rush the dawn. They wait for it. And I had been assigned to a dawn that no night could hold back. Even so, I doubted. Why me? I was not mighty. I was not majestic. I was not one of those stars that men name or poets praise. I had no constellation, no myth, no tribute carved into the columns of temples. I was ordinary, small. But heaven does not choose by size. It chooses by surrender. I would learn that. I would feel it ripple through my flame like wind through wheat, but not yet. For now, I waited. Above cities asleep in sin. Above priests who had long since stopped listening, above shepherds who prayed without hope, above a virgin girl whose heartbeat pulsed in harmony with heaven and had no idea, above a world ripe for redemption yet blind to its need. And still I watched, and still I waited. I was the light not yet called, the signal not yet sent, but I would be ready. When the sky opened and the silence broke, I would fall not in defeat, but in declaration, not as a spectacle, but as a sign. For even the smallest star, in the hands of the eternal, can announce the arrival of the infinite. In the stillness between stars, where no voice of man can reach, and no breath of earth can stir the silence, I began to hear the whispers. They did not come all at once, nor did they carry the clarity of human speech. They were not bound by tone or syllable. They moved like light, bending through water, subtle, soft, but utterly unignorable. At first, I thought it was memory echoes of ages past, reverberating through the fabric of space. The universe is not quiet. It hums with remnants of creation, with songs long since sung and prayers long since buried. But this was not a ghost of history. This was new, ancient, yes, but unfolding now, like a scroll being unrolled at the very edge of time. The whispers moved among the hosts of heaven, not with urgency but with a growing gravity, as if even the highest cherubim had paused in flight to listen. There was awe in the hush, and reverence in the restraint. No trumpet was sounded. No great decree shouted across the cosmos. Just this quiet rippling of pulse that passed from light to light, from flame to flame, until even I, a lesser star with no name, felt the echo in the center of my being. It was happening, not it happened, not will happen, happening. That was the word, present, now. And I, who had waited so long, found myself trembling, not from fear, Stars do not fear, but from something deeper, knowing that something holy was drawing near, and I was not ready. Could one ever be ready for God descending, for the eternal choosing time, for the Word becoming flesh? I do not know how heaven keeps its balance when its King steps down. I do not know how eternity holds its breath, but I know it did. Every orbit bent slightly toward that unseen center. Every angel felt it in the beat of their wings. Every creature in heaven knew what earth had forgotten, that something was being prepared. And the preparation was not grand, not loud, not visible. It was a preparation of hearts, of obedience, of surrender. A young girl was saying yes. A carpenter was choosing trust. A people were groaning in shadows. A world was aching for a light it no longer believed in. And above them all, we listen. Stars, angels, wind and flame. We listened to the one who had begun speaking again, not in thunder, not in fire, but in the whisper of a womb. It was then I realized I was not alone in the waiting. Around me, other stars were shifting, drawing near in formation, as if the sky itself were aligning for something sacred. They did not speak to me. We rarely do. We are watchers, not talkers. But their presence was a kind of affirmationa, silent chorus of witnesses called to attention. I recognized one, older than I, who had burned above Ur of the Chaldeans when Abraham looked up and heard his promise. Another had shimmered over Sinai as Moses descended with stone etched by fire. And still another had hovered near Bethlehem generations ago when Ruth gleaned and David dreamed. We had all seen moments. But this was something more. This was not a moment. It was the turning of the ages. And the whispers only grew. Not louder, just deeper, as if each word spoken in heaven was soaking into the skin of history, preparing it to carry the weight of glory. I could feel time folding, not ending, but giving birth. And though I had no lips to speak and no breath to sigh, I longed to say what I could not say, that I was not worthy, but I was willing. The Eternal does not ask stars for their permission, but He honors their willingness. That was something I learned then, that even the voiceless can consent, even the distant can draw near, even a flicker can become a flame if the author wills it. So I waited again, but this waiting was different. This waiting had a pulse, a heartbeat. I was no longer merely drifting. I was being held, positioned, aligned, prepared. Not for my glory, but for His. Somewhere below, blood was beginning to form in the womb of a virgin, and with every cell that took shape, the silence above trembled. The whispers had become song not yet sung, but ready. And I, the unseen star, felt my orbit tighten, felt gravity bend, not toward a black hole, but toward a cradle, toward a cry, toward a cross. I did not yet know the cost. I only knew the call. And in that knowing, I burned a little brighter, not because I tried, but because I trusted. For the first time, I saw my light not as a flicker in darkness, but as a thread in a tapestry of hope, a spark in a story not mine, but entrusted to me. And that was enough. It would always be enough. There are gatherings in heaven that no mortal voice has ever sung of, no scribe has ever dared to imagine, not because they are hidden, but because they are holy beyond telling. And on the edge of one such gathering, I hovered, barely allowed into the radius of its radiance, not as a participant, but as a witness, small, silent, expectant. The hosts were assembling, not in haste, not in fear, but in that reverent order which speaks not of power but of purpose. Thrones and dominions, principalities and powers, the elders crowned in wisdom, the cherubim burning with ceaseless fire, and the seraphim whose song had not faltered since before time was born all came. They did not fly, they did not fall, they did not march. They arrived, as if summoned by a thought so ancient it predated even light. The atmosphere pulsed not with pressure, but with presence, the kind of presence that makes even stars, who are fire themselves, feel dim. I did not know what was being prepared, not fully. None of us did. That, too, is part of the humility of heaven. No creature, no matter how close to the throne, assumes the whole of the will of God. We receive, we respond. That is the joy of obedience. And in this gathering, joy was the undercurrent, strange, aching, radiant joy, as if every being knew that something was about to be given that would never be taken back. I watched as the Archangel Michael stepped forward, not with weapon but with wonder, his eyes reflecting a gravity even war could not give. Gabriel stood beside him, the breath of the message still on his wings, for he had gone and returned, and the girl had said yes. The word was now flesh, though hidden in silence, folded in skin, invisible to kings and prophets, known only to her and the Father and the fire of the Spirit that had passed through her like light through silk. This was the moment heaven had waited for, and none of us could sing it yet. There was too much trembling, too much glory, too much mercy. The hosts did not move in formation. There was no choreography, yet somehow they shifted into harmony, each taking place as if led by a melody that had never needed to be taught. I felt my place not in the center, not in the front, but high and quiet, a sentinel near the edge of their light. I burned steady, small, but there, it is a gift to be near when eternity bows to time. Then it came not a command, not a declaration, but a stillness so deep it pierced. All movement ceased, all wings stilled, all eyes turned toward the center, where light itself seemed to kneel. I cannot describe what we saw. It was not form, it was not figure, it was, yes, pure, unfiltered, yes, the kind of yes that unravels all fear, undoes every lie, silences every accusation. A yes, so holy, it split the silence without sound. And from that yes came a decision made before time but now enacted within it. The Lamb would go, the Word would descend, the King would become child, and he would not come draped in majesty, he would come swaddled in weakness. The hosts did not cheer. Heaven is not loud for the sake of being loud. We wept. If stars can weep, I wept. If angels can tremble, they trembled, for we knew what it would cost him, and still he chose it. And in that choosing, we saw a glory brighter than creation itself, a glory not of brilliance but of burden carried in love. I felt myself drawn in not downward, but inward, as if the gravity of God's mercy was tugging at the core of every particle of me. I was not being summoned to act, but to align, to surrender, to be part of the canvas upon which this redemption would be painted. One of the hosts turned toward me then, whether by design or delight, I do not know, and for a moment, we beheld one another. There was no rank, no hierarchy, just recognition. I was a star, he was flame. But both of us bore light, not our own. Both of us awaited the same dawn. And as he turned back to the center, I felt a whisper press against my being, not as speech, but as sending. Go. Soon. Not yet, but soon. You will mark the moment, not to draw eyes to yourself, but to him. Fall when the time is right. Shine when the night is darkest, for you will not be alone. The skies will open, the angels will sing, the shepherds will watch, and you little light will burn with purpose. I could have burst from awe, but instead I steadied. That was the miracle. I did not explode with joy. I remained, positioned, held, ready, for that is the call of those entrusted with glory. We do not rush it. We carry it. I had always assumed that light was mine. Not ownership, but essence. I was born of it, formed in it, sustained by it. What else is a star, if not light? And yet, as the mystery unfolded above the turning world below, I began to understand my light was never my own. It had been lent, not granted, kindled, not created. And now, as I hovered in the vastness with the other watchers of heaven, I saw for the first time the difference between radiance and glory. Radiance is what I had, glory is what he is. There was no comparison. What shone from me was a borrowed flicker. What was being conceived in the womb of that young girl in Nazareth was the source of all fire, made flesh, and that light would not sear, it would not blind, it would not dazzle the eyes of kings, or summon the envy of sages. It would be hidden, carried, cradled, swaddled in skin and silence, a light not for display, but for healing, not for spectacle, but for salvation, a light that would step into shadow, not to overpower it, but to walk through eye-tone step at a time, one soul at a time, until the darkness itself forgot how to breathe. That was the kind of light he would be. And I, suspended between time and eternity, began to tremble in a way I had never known. I thought I had seen holy things. I had witnessed covenants written in sky-fire. I had watched as oceans split and laws thundered down mountains. I had stood sentinel over prophets and priests, kings and captives, but never had I seen anything like this, the infinite becoming infant, the word becoming whisper, the light becoming the least. I dimmed in response not from shame, but from reverence. I understood now why some stars fall. Not all are cast down. Some bow. Some descend in surrender. I would be one of them. When the time came, I would fall, not in judgment, but in joy. Not to be seen, but to point. I would not bring the light, I would reflect it. Even in my brightest moment, I would be but a frame to his face, and that, I was learning, was glory enough. As I turned my gaze once more toward the earth, I felt it, the quiet weight of imminence. Something was close, not in time, but in presence. The veil between heaven and earth was thinning. I could feel the breath of angels on the edge of atmosphere, not rushing, not frantic, but near. They were waiting too, each assigned their role in the divine unveiling. Some would sing, some would shield, some would strengthen. Each would bear light in their own way, but none would rival the light. Not even the greatest of them would claim what was being born below. For this light was not delegated, it was divine. I watched the earth turn slowly beneath me. Nazareth, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, names I had heard whispered in the courts of heaven, towns etched into the map of prophecy, places small enough to be overlooked by kings, yet chosen by the King of Kings. That, too, was part of the miracle, the humility of the plan. God would not arrive with thunder. He would not step into Caesar's palace or Herod's court. He would slip into the story through a door no one was watching. A womb, a manger, a cry in the night, muffled by straw and the lowing of cattle. And what was I in this unfolding? Just a star, a glint, a flame. But even stars, in his hands, can carry meaning, and mine, I was beginning to see, had been set apart, not for brilliance, but for witness. Not for command, but for confirmation. I would burn above the place where the light would rest. I would beckon the seekers, not with words, but with wonder. They would follow not because of me, but because something in their souls would recognize the echo of home. I would not explain, I would simply shine, and those who were watching would understand not with their minds, but with their hearts. For true seekers do not need to be convinced, they only need to be invited. And so I began to prepare, not by changing, but by consenting. I did not burn brighter, I burned truer. No longer trying to outshine the darkness, I simply yielded to the one who would defeat it. My light was not enough to save, but it was enough to point. And that, I realized, was the highest calling of any light, to become less, so that another might be seen. I whispered this to myself, those stars have no mouths. I held it in my flame, those stars have no hands. I carried it in my orbit, as if every revolution was a vow, a light not my own, a glory not for me, a mission not to be noticed, but to help others notice him. It was enough. It would always be enough. I had always remained where I was set fixed, not by force, but by fidelity. While galaxies swirled and planets danced their ordained ballet, I held my station, not out of pride, not out of indifference, but because to move without purpose is to wander, and wandering is not our way. Stars do not drift. We are positioned, anchored by design, not by chance. I had watched others fall comets, streaking with fury, some in wrath, some in glory, some in silent self-destruction, but I had never considered falling myself. I had thought my calling was to remain, to be still, to shine from afar. But then came the whisper, gentle yet undeniable, that echoed not in my flame but in the silence behind it. It was not a command, it was not a shout, it was a beckoning. Fall, it said, not to end, to begin, not in death, in direction, not by accident, but for purpose. The very thought shook me. To fall was to break the pattern, to release control, to descend into what I could not predict. But with the whisper came peace, not the kind that coddles, but the kind that commissions, and so I said yes. I do not know how long passed between that yes and the moment I moved. Time is different among the stars. We do not count hours. We mark obedience. But when the moment came, it came not with trumpet or tremor. It came with surrender. I let go, not of light, but of stillness, not of identity, but of comfort. I began to move, slowly at first, a tilt, a shift, a reorientation of everything I thought I was. And then, like wind catching a sail, I fell, not tumbling, not spiraling, but guided. There is a kind of falling that is not collapse, but calling. A descent that is not downward, but inward. I felt it in every flicker of my flame that this was not about direction in space, but direction in story. I was not being pulled. I was being drawn, like iron to magnet, like seed to soil, like child to father. I passed other stars, some startled, some silent, a few bowing in quiet recognition. They did not follow. This was not their journey. Each star has its purpose. Mine was now motion, and as I descended, the earth grew closer, not just in distance, but in detail. What once was a blue marble wrapped in cloud became texture, contour, the curve of coastlines, the winding veins of rivers, the jagged rise of mountains. I saw the lights of cities flickering like nervous hearts. I saw caravans crawling like ants across desert spines. I saw fires burning in the night, not for warmth, but for waiting. The world was ready. It didn't know it, but it was. I drew closer still, and three nestled in the folds of a forgotten hill town was the place. Small, silent, sacred, Bethlehem, a name written in prophecy, whispered in prayers, overlooked by emperors but cradled in the heart of God. My light steadied as I hovered above it. I did not blaze, I did not roar. I simply stayed. I was not the message. I was only the marker, a finger pointing to a cradle, a candle in the window of a world too weary to believe that love had come. And yet, even in that stillness, I felt the trembling of what I was announcing. Not the birth of a prophet, not the rise of a teacher, not the beginning of a revolution, but the arrival of God, in skin, in silence, in straw. That truth seared through me more than any fire ever had. The one who formed the stars had entered the story beneath them. The Creator had become the created. The light had entered darkness, and not as a blaze, but as a baby. I do not know how long I hovered there. Time again bent around that holy hour. But I know this: I was not alone. From the edges of the sky came others, not stars, not angels, seekers, men from the east, guided not just by science, but by hunger. They had read the signs. They had dared the journey. They had believed what others dismissed, and they had followed my fall. When they saw me, they knew, not because I was bright, but because I was there, positioned, present, over the very place where heaven had touched earth. They dismounted. They knelt. They opened what they had carried across continents: gold for a king, frankincense for divinity, myrrh for sacrifice. But it was not the gifts that mattered. It was the gaze. They looked upon the child, and in their eyes I saw a reflection not of myself, but of the one I had been pointing to. That was enough. More than enough. I, who had watched from distance for ages untold, had now come close, not to be worshipped, but to witness. Not to dazzle, but to direct. And in that closeness, I understood something that no distance could teach. Falling, when led by love, is not falling at all. It is flying toward purpose, toward the place where all light begins, toward the center of the story that holds every story. I had not lost my position. I had fulfilled it. I was not lower. I was aligned. For even stars, when they obey, find themselves in the exact place they were meant to shine. And so I remained falling, yet steady, dim, yet burning, seen, yet not the focus. I was not the light, but I was near it. And sometimes, that is the greatest glory of all. Before I fell, before I knew where I would be called to shine, before the hosts assembled and the veil began to thin, there was Nazareth. Not Jerusalem, not Rome, not any city crowned with marble or known for thrones. Just Nazareth, a place so small, so common, that even prophets skipped over its name. A village without renown, a corner of the earth where dust spoke louder than doctrine, and the dreams of the people rarely reached past survival. Yet heaven had turned its gaze there, and so, in the days before I began to move, I hovered above it quietly, invisibly, like a breath waiting in the lungs of the universe. I was not the only one watching. The angels knew, the Spirit knew, even the silence knew. Something sacred was forming beneath that thatched roof near the edge of the town, something eternal unfolding behind a clay wall where no one thought to look. The house was humble, the girl inside, even more so. Her name, spoken often by her mother and rarely beyond the village, floated into my hearing: Mary. I saw her before she was told. I saw her in the garden, drawing water. I saw her at night, staring at stars, perhaps even at me, without knowing she herself had been chosen to carry the one who made them. She prayed, not with spectacle but with sincerity. Her words were not eloquent, they were true. She asked not for greatness, she asked for grace. She did not seek to be seen, she sought to be faithful, and heaven, which looks not at stature but surrender, had already answered her before she knew to ask. When Gabriel arrived, he did not come with a shout. He came with light. Yes, but it was the kind of light that leans in, not looms. I saw it. I felt it ripple through the fabric of atmosphere, like the breath before a kiss. The angel entered, and time paused. Not for long. Just enough for the world to hush, while eternity spoke. "Hail, full of grace," he said. The words were old, older than language, but in her ears, they sounded new. She trembled. Who wouldn't? Holiness always startles, not because it's loud, but because it's near. He told her the plan, or at least what could be told, that the Holy Spirit would overshadow her, that the child she would bear would be called Son of the Most High, that the throne of David would be restored not in politics, but in promise. I held my flame steady, watching, waiting. The fate of the world balanced on the edge of her response, not because she was forced, because she was free. That is what made it holy. Heaven does not violate, it invites. And when she said yes, when those quiet words passed her lips and echoed through the chambers of time, I saw it, not with eyes, but with essence. A spark, not of fire, but of flesh. The word became a cell. God entered creation, not with a shout, but with a heartbeat. I wanted to sing. Stars can't sing not in ways you'd understand, but our light sometimes trembles with joy. Mine did then. I shimmered over Nazareth, unseen, rejoicing with the air, with the soil, with the space between atoms that now pulsed with the presence of their maker. Days passed. I stayed, not out of necessity, but affection. The girl moved through her routines, washing, praying, smiling sometimes, but often retreating into thought. I could not hear her thoughts, but I could see their shape in the way she paused by the window or touched her belly when no one was watching. She was not afraid. She was reverent. There is a difference. She knew who had visited her, and though she didn't understand everything, she trusted. The same way I trusted the whisper to fall. I saw Joseph too, before the dream, before the angel came to him in the night. I watched him wrestle in silence. He loved her. That much was clear, and the confusion on his face, how could something so pure feel like betrayal, tore at him like wind across dry branches. But he did not lash out. He did not accuse. He waited. He wept, and heaven answered. The dream came, and when he woke, he did not hesitate. He believed. He believed what no logic could support. He believed that the child was not his, but would be his to raise. And in that belief, I saw strength greater than any king. I saw a man who chose obedience over image, calling over comfort. Together, they became a sanctuary. Not a palace, not a temple. Just two hearts wrapped in yes, forming a space where the Savior could grow. I hovered above it all, learning, not facts, but faith. Their days unfolded without fanfare. No parades, no proclamations, just preparation. She sewed. He carved. They laughed. They cried. The world below them remained unaware. The heavens above them held their breath. I did not shine brightly. Not yet. It was not time, but I held my light ready, knowing that soon, my role would not be to hover, but to herald. Still, I wanted to linger over Nazareth just a while longer. There was something sacred about its simplicity. The way eternity had nested itself inside the ordinary. It reminded me that glory does not always come with noise. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in quiet, in trust, in a girl no one noticed, in a man no one praised, in a village no one respected, in a womb no one saw, and over all of it, I kept watch. Not because I was needed, but because I was moved. For in Nazareth, heaven had touched earth, and earth, through two hearts made ready, had whispered back, "Let it be." Before Bethlehem, before the journey and the census, and the night filled with song, I passed once more over the place that was meant to hold his name, the temple. Jerusalem's heart, Israel's pride, a mountain made holy not by stone but by presence, and yet, as I hovered above it, something felt vacant, not empty of noise, not devoid of ritual, but lacking that pulse of expectancy, that ache of waiting which once stirred every curtain and candle within its courts. The rituals continued. Yes, the priests moved as they always had. Sacrifices were offered. Prayers were mumbled. The steps worn smooth by centuries of procession still carried robes and incense, but the fire had faded, not the flame on the altar, but the fire of longing in their hearts. I had seen the temple in its golden days, long before I was called to fall. I had seen the Shekinah glory settle like thunder wrapped in light. I had watched prophets weep in its courts, watched exiles return with dust on their feet and hope in their bones. But now I saw routine without reverence, law without love, a building filled with symbols, yet empty of surrender. And still I hovered, not in judgment, in grief, for this was the place where heaven and earth were once stitched together, the seam where God had leaned close enough to be heard. And they no longer listened. Not truly. Their ears heard the sound of coins and prayers, but their hearts had stopped tuning to the frequency of promise. The one they waited for was drawing near, and they would miss him not because he was hidden, but because their eyes were fixed on thrones, not mangers. I watched a priest enter the holy place. His hands moved with practiced ease, his mouth reciting words so ancient they had become background noise. He adjusted the lampstand. He placed the bread. He lit the incense. He bowed. Then he turned, not with awe, but with habit, and walked out. He did not pause. He did not wonder. The veil behind him fluttered slightly, not from wind, but from waiting. I felt the ache of that veil, a barrier once burning with anticipation, now hanging like a forgotten curtain in an old house. It would tear one day. Not yet, but soon. Torn not by hands, but by a cry that would rise from wood, not altar, from a hill, not a sanctuary. But for now, the veil remained, and I burned above it, watching, waiting, wondering if any heart beneath me would still recognize the signs. A child wandered into the outer court, dragging behind him a toy carved from fig wood. He looked up at the towering stones, eyes wide, lips parted. Wonder lived in him. I saw it. It shimmered in the way he touched the steps as if they were alive. For a moment, he stood still, staring at the great doors, as if expecting them to open not by force, but by invitation. He turned to speak to his mother, but she was already pulling him away, distracted, tired. The child glanced back once more before disappearing into the crowd. He had felt something. He had not yet learned to ignore it. I lingered over that moment, for though kings would pass this place blind, and scribes would dissect scrolls until meaning bled out of them, it was children simple, searching, unstained by pride, who still sensed the holy. A breeze moved through the courtyard, and I followed it with my flame, tracing its path through colonnades and shadow. It whispered through the chambers where the Sanhedrin debated law and power, through the vaults where coins clinked and pride grew fat. It passed unnoticed, but I noticed, for I had learned, in Nazareth and among the hosts, that God rarely enters through the doors men decorate. He comes through cracks, through humility, through surrender, and this temple, though gilded and grand, had sealed itself from the very one it claimed to honor. Still, he would come, not with wrath, but with tears, not with vengeance, but with zeal. He would overturn the tables, yes, but not in fury, in grief, because what had been meant as a house of prayer had become a marketplace of pride. I saw it all from above, the stones, the noise, the shadows, the longing buried under generations of control, and I whispered, in my own way, a lament. Not because it was too late, but because it was nearly too late. There was still time. A remnant still watched, an old man who waited in the court each morning, scanning every face for the promise he had been told he would see before he died. A widow who fasted in silence, her eyes red but her hope unshaken. They would see him, they would hold him, but not yet, for now, he was still hidden, growing, forming, carried by a girl no one noticed in a town no one revered. And the temple, though it had forgotten how to wait, would one day receive him. Not in glory, but in arms. Not in power, but in paradox. I began to move then, slowly, silently, leaving the temple behind, not out of anger, but because my place was not above the stones of pride, but over the straw of surrender. He would not come to reclaim the throne of Herod or the robes of Caiaphas. He would come to reclaim hearts, and I, a simple star, would light the way. But before I left, I turned once more to the veil. I do not know if it sensed me, but I sensed it, waiting, tense, ready, not yet torn, but loosening. For when the light would cry out on a different hill, not in the temple's shadow, but in its fulfillment, the veil would finally understand it was never meant to last. It was only meant to hold space, until love himself tore through. And so I descended, slowly, steadily, a witness not to judgment, but to joy, not to wrath, but to wonder, not to the silence of stone, but to the song about to rise from a manger in Bethlehem. And as I fell, I did not mourn the temple. I hoped for it, for even sacred things must be remade when glory comes close. As I moved away from the temple, away from the silence of forgotten prayers, and toward the edge of a new beginning, my light passed over palaces, not one, not two, many thrones, scattered across the earth, each guarded, gilded, grasped. There was Herod's palace, its corridors glittering with stolen gold and trembling ambition, a monument to fear disguised as authority. I saw him, Herod the Great, surrounded by sycophants and shadows, pacing in robes too heavy for the heart that wore them. His eyes, dark and restless, darted toward every whisper of rebellion, every echo of prophecy. He had heard the murmurs, rumors of a child, of a king, and though he laughed in public, his dreams were pierced by that possibility. A king not chosen by Caesar, a king not born in marble halls, but perhaps somewhere in a place Herod would never stoop to look. He feared what he could not find, and so he plotted, not yet openly, but soon. Power always fears what it cannot control. I drifted further, over the coiled glory of Roman strongholds. I saw governors scribbling decrees, soldiers polishing weapons in torchlight, messengers galloping with orders written in ink and pride. Their minds were fixed on census and coin, on laws and legions. They knew nothing of Bethlehem, nothing of a girl carrying glory in her womb, nothing of the tremble in the sky, and they wouldn't have cared if they did. The empire had no room for poetry, only power, and yet they too were part of the story. Unwitting instruments in the hands of a God who bends history not by might, but by mercy. Their decrees would move the girl and her husband. Their census would fulfill a prophecy they had never read. Even the indifferent serve the divine. I moved again, over smaller thrones, local rulers, religious elites, men cloaked in self-importance and tradition, each one certain they understood the times, each one blind to the light forming beneath their very sky. They did not fear me, they did not see me, but the one I was called to announce, him they would fear, not because he would raise an army, but because he would raise the dead, because he would speak with authority not derived from politics, but from presence, because he would not be controlled, and when control is all you have, freedom looks like a threat. I saw these thrones not with anger, but with sadness, for they were so small, these seats of power, even when built on mountains and stained with blood. They were small not in size, but in soul. Their glory was brittle, their crowns were hollow, and yet they clung to them as if eternity depended on it. The kings of earth had forgotten how to kneel. That would be their undoing. And still, above them all, I burned. Small, unthreatening, just a light in the sky. But I knew when the time came, I would outshine every throne, not by brilliance, by direction. For I would point not to palace, but to presence. Not to marble halls, but to manger straw. Not to a king who took, but to one who gave all. That was the difference. That was the divide between heaven's king and earth's. Earth's kings hoarded. Heaven's king emptied himself. I felt the weight of that truth like a gravity stronger than any orbit. For the one who formed the galaxies had chosen to arrive not on a chariot of fire, but through the cries of birth. Not into power, but into peril. Not into applause, but into anonymity. That kind of love breaks thrones. Not with violence, but with vulnerability. And I would be the first to announce it. Not with words, with presence. My falling would be his signpost. A fire hung low, not to intimidate, but to invite. Come, I would say without speaking. Look here, beneath the sky. Here lies peace. Here lies purpose. Here lies a king not like any you have ever known. I hovered one last moment over the throne of Herod. His face, aged with fear, stared out a window, eyes scanning stars, lips muttering to himself. He would try to stop it. He would send soldiers. He would shed blood, and yet all his might would crumble beneath the whisper of a newborn's breath. He didn't know it yet, but his throne had already been shaken, not by rebellion, by redemption, and redemption always begins quietly. I turned from him, from all of them, from every seat of pride and platform of power. I turned toward Bethlehem, toward the unseen, the unnoticed, the unfolding. My fall would begin soon. My flame would descend, and in that descent, I would declare what no throne could contain, that heaven had come not to conquer, but to call. And only those who listened not from palaces, but from pastures would hear it. The kings of earth would miss the moment, but the broken, the lowly, the watching, they would see the sign. Because sometimes the only throne that matters is the one found in a feeding trough. There comes a moment in every silence when it can no longer hold its weight. It stretches, trembles, and then without scream or signal it tears. Not because it is broken, because it is fulfilled. That was what the sky felt like that night over Bethlehem. For so long, it had been thick with waiting, layered with prophecy and longing, threaded with centuries of questions that hovered unanswered above the heads of shepherds and kings alike. But that night, it broke, not in wrath, in wonder, not from pressure, from promise. The heavens opened not as a wound, but as a window. And for the first time since Eden, earth saw the glory that had only been whispered of in dreams. I had never witnessed such unveiling. The fabric between eternity and time pulled back like a curtain, and through it spilled light not like mine, not like the stars or the moon or even the sun, but light alive, light that sang. The angels descended, not in ranks, but in radiance. Their voices did not echo, they enveloped. Each word, each note, wrapped around the night like balm on an old scar. Glory to God in the highest, they sang, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests. I watched it all from my place above. I had fallen far by then, holding steady over the manger where the light now lay swaddled in human skin. My flame pulsed in rhythm with his breathing. I had never burned with such clarity. Not because I was bright, because I was true. Every particle of me aligned with purpose, every flicker a testimony. And as the sky tore open and the song rolled like thunder wrapped in silk, I knew this was not spectacle. This was a sign, not of triumph as the world defines it, but of truth. The truth cradled in straw under my trembling light. The shepherds saw it, eyes wide, hands gripping staffs like anchors. These were men the world ignored, men who knew the night, who had learned to listen not for symphonies but for wolves. And yet, they were the ones chosen to hear the song, the first to be invited. The sky did not open over palaces or marketplaces. It opened over fields, over silence, over the ones whose hearts had not forgotten how to wonder, and wonder they did. They fell to their knees, not in fear, but in something deeper in worship. I watched them run, stumbling, shouting, laughing, half weeping as they searched for the sign the angels had declared. A baby, in a manger, wrapped in cloths, and they found him, just as heaven had said, just as the prophets had promised. I do not know what they spoke to Mary or Joseph. I could not hear, but I saw their faces, lit by starlight and love, etched with disbelief that had become belief. They left that manger different than they came. Not cleaner, not richer, but awakened. They would never look at the sky the same way again. I hovered there long after they had gone. The angels had returned. The sky had sealed itself once more, though its edges still shimmered with memory. The child slept. The world, save for a few hearts, still spun unaware. But I knew, and I stayed. My role was not yet finished. Others would come. More eyes would lift. More questions would stir, and I would burn steady until they arrived. That night, I did not wish to shine brighter. I only wished to remain faithful, to hold my position until every step in this unfolding story had been taken. I thought of all the nights that had come before, the dark ones, the silent ones, the nights when prophets cried out and no answer came, the nights when mothers clutched empty cribs and priests offered empty prayers. I thought of them all, and then I looked down, and I saw him, the answer to every question, breathing beneath my light, and I wept, not as mortals do, but as only stars can, in stillness, in reverence, in release. For the sky had torn open not to frighten, but to free, and in that freedom I found my joy. I was not the message, I was the marker, and my light would remain until every heart willing to look up would find their way to the one who came down. The night of his birth has passed. The angels have folded their wings. The shepherds have returned to their flocks, carrying stories no one quite knows how to believe. The mother sleeps now, or tries to, her body tired, her heart stunned silent by what she now holds against her skin. The father watches the door, protective, uncertain, but steady, and the child the word rests, eyes closed, fingers curled, breath soft as a whisper rising from deep within the ancient silence. The light has come, and still I shine. My task might seem complete. The seekers have seen me. The song has been sung. The moment has happened, and yet I remain. For moments like this do not end with a single night. They stretch, they echo, they live in the turning of time, in the rising of hope, in the kindling of questions deep in the hearts of those who dare to believe. I shine not to celebrate the past, but to steady the present, to guide the future. Not for him, he no longer needs me, he never did, but for them, for the ones who are still looking. Because long after the shepherds return to silence, and long after the wise men leave their gifts and vanish into history, the world will keep spinning, and the hearts that hunger for light will still need something to lift their eyes. Not something loud, not something grand, just something true. So I stay, I burn, quietly, consistently. I do not dazzle, I do not demand. I simply remain where I was placed, above the child, above the hope, above the turning world that does not yet know what has just begun. I watch the visitors come in waves, some curious, some skeptical, some reverent. They kneel, or they don't. They speak, or they stare in silence. And I light them all the same, not based on their response, but based on their search. He lies there wrapped still in cloth, resting in the wooden feed box carved by hands that will later teach him to work, to bleed, to break bread. No halo, no glow, just a baby. But I know, I saw what tore the sky, I heard what shook the stillness. I witnessed what glory looks like when it chooses humility. And so I shine, not because I must, because I may, because I was asked to, because I was chosen not for brilliance, but for presence. There are stars brighter than I, greater, older. Yet it was me. I was the one called to fall, to descend, to hover, and hold the night while heaven became flesh. That honor burns in me now, not as pride, as purpose. I think often of what will come. I know what others do not. This child will grow. He will walk among the poor and the proud. He will speak words that ignite hearts and offend powers. He will stretch out his hands not to grasp a throne, but to touch the leper, the blind, the wounded. He will disappear into the wilderness, into prayer, into pain. He will rise, he will fall, and one day he will rise again. But tonight he only sleeps, and I only shine. This is the beauty of beginnings. We do not have to rush to the end. We do not have to explain it all. We only have to stay near, to be present, to hold space for the miracle that has come. And this is mine to hold. I burn above him, not to illuminate him. He needs no help but to remind the world where to look. Not to the palace, not to the temple, not to the throne, but to the straw, to the skin, to the sigh of God made infant. Some will forget. Many already have. They will go back to their lives. They will speak of stars and songs as legend. They will doubt what they cannot measure. They will dismiss what they cannot control. But a few, always a few, will remember. And to them, I will remain, a fixed point in the sky, a quiet voice in the dark, a reminder that something once happened so beautiful, so impossible, that even the stars changed their paths to bear witness. And when those few look up, I will be there, not to call attention to myself, but to say, again and again, without words, He came, He is, He will come again. That is what I carry, that is why I remain, not to be seen, to help others see. And so, while empires rise and fall, while kings crown themselves in pride, and prophets cry in wildernesses, I will keep watch. I will hold this light. I will stay over this manger, long after the crowds have gone, long after the shepherds have grown old, long after the wise men have returned to their distant land. And when the time comes when the boy becomes a man, when the man becomes the sacrifice, when the veil tears and the sky breaks once more, perhaps then I will fall again. But until that day, I will stay, and still I shine.